Mr. Kenney, do you worry about the impact that these taxes will have on low-income families?
Yes, absolutely. People who are the most vulnerable, and of course the proponents of carbon taxes say that's offset by rebates. These are not. One of the problems with carbon taxes, unlike other forms of consumption taxes, that the cost of them cascade down through the economy and hit average people the hardest. What's effectively happened in Alberta is they've taken, in part, a tax that was on the major oil companies that produce emissions and now impose it on ordinary people through the carbon tax. Mr. Begin actually said that was a feature. I think it's a bug. He actually said, he pointed out that global multinational oil companies like the NDP carbon tax because they don't have to pay for their own emissions. The consumer does. It gets pushed down through the economy. And so, Mr. Chairman, I think that I'm surprised to see parties of the left now supporting a regressive form of taxation which imposes a disproportionately large burden on lower-income people.
And on that, well, my question was directed at Mr. Kenney. Is this going to come off my time?
I usually will save your time. Mr. Leach.
Yes, I'd be very interested to see any evidence that suggests that the Alberta policy imposes a large burden on lower-income individuals. Statistics Canada certainly disagrees with that. If you look at the 2017 data, it showed that over 40% of Albertans were made better off, the bottom 40% by income, were made on average better off by the combination of the carbon tax and rebates, including the indirect effects that Mr. Kenney mentions. And then, if you look at the 2018 data, before any adjustments to the credit that I'd like to see forthcoming, you're still looking at about 35% of Albertans, the lowest 35% of Albertan households by income, who are made better off. And that's Statistics Canada's data, their SPSM model. That's not just something that's made up. You know, you're entitled to an opinion, but not evidence, your own evidence.
I don't want to get into a debate in the left-hand corner of the, yes, Jason, go ahead.
I would invite Professor Leach to join with me on I'll take him out on the road for a day or so. We could visit some charities and nonprofits that are barely hanging together, and on which this is imposing massive additional costs. Perhaps he'd like to be part of the fundraiser that the Sundry Senior Centre is now having to hold amongst low-income seniors to pay the growing carbon tax bill, for which they get no offset, no credit. There are huge gaps in how this addresses the cost burden on low-income people.